everyone. Welcome to the Art Workshop. My name is Chris Epling. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We appreciate it so much here at Pike TV. Your viewership means a lot to us. If you were to follow along with the tutorial today and you get a chance, please send us your artwork. That's something we'd really like to share here on the show. And it doesn't matter what rendition of or how you did it, what medium you used it in. You don't have to follow any rules that I set within the show. We just want to share your work. This show's about you more than it is about anything we're doing here. And we are talking about a specific tutorial today. It's something I'm really excited about. And if you were to follow along and take the time to do it, please send your artwork to piketv99@gmail.com along with your name and whatever else information you'd like to share about yourself. Now in today's episode, we're going to be looking at dragons. Now dragons are across the globe, when you talk about folklore, mythology, and very ancient beliefs from early Chinese mythology all the way leading up to Norse mythology, even to modern day in some cultures, mountains, the formation of mountains, if you think about it, from the ridges, the saddles, the spurs, the draws, all these shapes that make mountains, early belief was that these shapes were the actual backs of dragons. So you could imagine a sleeping dragon laying there, and the spine or whatever types of shapes that the mountains make up make the different types of shapes of mountaintops and ridges. So there's a real big push now to kind of incorporate, I think from a few organizations around the region, this belief that the rising dragon, so that kind of sounds a little foreboding in a way, but it's meant for a good intent in terms of Appalachia coming up and pulling ourselves up, and what's the next phase for us here as folks that live in this region. So I thought, why not today take a look at dragons? So we're going to draw a dragon together, a sleeping dragon, and then we're also going to be looking at tone. Tone is something that I've been talking a lot about lately with art. And when we talk about tone, it can mean a lot of different things. So I want you to imagine one color and then a variation of all the different tones of that color. So we're going to be looking at green today. That's going to be the focus. So you can see what I mean more about it here in a second. Now I want to share with you the materials that I brought in today. What I have to work with here, of course, the first and most important thing that I have is the pencil. So you're going to have a pencil at home, and you need an eraser. This is a block eraser. It's kind of small, but you can see it better that way. Or a kneaded eraser. If you don't have either one of those, that's fine. All you really need is the eraser that's on the tip of your pencil, right? The second thing that I'm going to be using today is a brush. So I brought in this round tip number 10 brush. Round meaning that it comes at a curve, and it's sort of thick. You can see on your screen there that this compared to this one is much larger. So this is a fine tip round brush as compared to this one. This is a number 1, and this is a number 10. Those two numbers mean basically the size of the tip of the brush. The next material that I'm going to be using, of course, is going to be water. So I've brought in a little reservoir of water here. This is a neat little carry-on or carry-all device that you can actually put a lid on, and then you can take it with you, and it connects with a clip on the back of it here, which I can't show you, I'd spill it, to your artboard. So if you're ever wanting to go and do watercolor, try to look into maybe getting one of these. They're super cheap, maybe 79, 80 cents, and it's metal, so it lasts a while. I'm also going to be using a palette, or at least a variation of wood. So this will be my palette where I put all the colors. I shouldn't say colors. It's going to be one color in different tones. Now I chose for the color green. Now this is a watercolor, even though it looks like liquid. This is a water-based medium, watercolor. It usually comes in blocks, but this is actually already in a liquid form. So you could take this, and what the idea is, you put a little bit of water down into one of these cups, and you add a drop or two of this into that, and it colors that water a tone of green. The more ink that you use, or watercolor you use in the water mixture, the deeper the tone is going to be. So the more water you have, the less tone. The less water you have, the more tone. So we're going to be looking at those two things. And I normally never do talk about this on the show much, but I think it's important to bring this up. So if you do use brushes a whole lot, which I do, and we do on the show here, you may want to think about cleaning them at some point, right? And there's a couple of tools that you can get or materials that you can get to help with that. Now, if you're using brushes primarily with ink in them, you want to get a pen cleaner ink, which honest to goodness, this is a lot just like Windex. So if you have Windex at home, you can literally take some Windex, put that into a small, maybe a bottle cap lid, and take your brush and then run it around in that lid a little bit to get the ink out. But you can also buy a version of Windex in a little container that says pen cleaner if you want, but it's going to be basically the same material. Now this is also for watercolor. You can use this for watercolor too. So, and there's another option that you have. Now this is actually for oil paints, watercolor, acrylic, and even staining. And what this is a preserver and a brush cleaner. And it's like a wax, so you open it up and you would take your brush, get it wet, wash it out first pretty good, and then run this over top of your brush in order to get the nice tip that you want to keep for your brushes. Taking care of your materials is really important with art. You want to be sure and do that because no one wants to have to go and constantly buy the same brush over and over in order to do a drawing with. That's really not cost effective and it's wasteful. So look into different ways you can clean your brush. Of course, soap and water is always good except for oils. Oils, you'll definitely have to get some sort of a cleaner for that. So we're going to start out today. I'm going to basically put my materials off to the side here. I'm going to be using them a lot. So we're going to be starting off today by sketching out our dragon first within this blue square. Then we'll talk about tone, and we'll talk about the variation of tone in a minute. And I'll put kind of like a chart here at the top to show you how you could go from light to dark using the different consistency of water. So we're starting out down at the bottom of your paper, and turn your paper long ways, or more like in school when I teach kids, teachers say hamburger or hot dog. Basically, if your paper is more tall than it is wide, it's a hamburger. If it's more wide than it is tall, that's a hot dog. So turn your paper like a hot dog. And we're going to start at the bottom, and I want you to draw an oval right down here at the bottom. Now I'm also going to be using a pen today, so these lines that I'm making here that you can't see very well, in a minute after we trace this out and sketch it out, I'm going to be using a pen to go over it, so you'll be able to see the lines a little bit better. But we're starting out with this oval, the main bottom. I like to use a method called the Marvel method when I draw, which basically means you sketch out all the shapes of the drawing first. So you sketch out the general shapes of what it is you're drawing first, then you go back in and put the detail in. This is like building a framework for your art. We've talked a lot about this on the show. Now I've added this other shape. It kind of looks like an oval. You have to kind of follow the lines of what it is you're wanting to draw. So with this drawing, the head of the dragon is going to be down here. The back's going to be coming up this way. So I first started, of course, with this oval here. Then I drew this oval shape coming back. Now towards the rear, back here, I want you to add another oval right back there. So you have three shapes here. You have an oval, another oval, and sort of a circle. Once we have these three shapes, we have everything we need now to go in and start to put all this detail in. Now I'm going to be using, like I said, watercolor in a little bit. So I want to get rid of these pencil lines after I've sketched this out. Starting down at the bottom, right here, I would like for you to come, I'm going to grab my pen and actually try to draw this. So you press down hard at home while I draw in ink form, okay? So starting at the top, you want to trace over the top portion of this circle, right here at the top. I'll try to draw this as thick as I can so you can see it. So right here on the edges, we're going to put two lines like this. One here and one here. Now right behind those two lines that we made, I want you to bring a line coming out, back in, and then this shape here too. So you have two shapes. Our first shape is this little point that comes up, and the second is the ear of the dragon. And we're going to do another one on this side. This one comes up to a point, back down, just like that. Now once you have those two lines, I'm going to see if I can actually use this brush pen. You may be able to see this a little bit better. There we go. Now the one dangerous thing about drawing, starting out using a pen instead of doing all this in pencil first, is that when I go to actually put the watercolor down, if this ink hasn't dried efficiently, you're going to get some black bleed over into your work. But we'll see. We can't let it dry first. Now I've drawn this horn shape here, horn shape here. This is an ear. I want to draw another ear on this side. So bring this little shape coming in like that on that side. Now you can kind of see how the head is starting to form a little bit. Now we have these swirls that come off the top of the dragon, and I'm not really sure what these are. If you look at traditional Japanese art, or if you look at any type of early Norse art, anything dealing with dragons and things, you'll see that there's these strange kind of flowing shapes. It could be variations of horns, or I'm not really sure what they are, but you find these a lot on the different sketches of dragons. Get this coming off here, coming down. We're going to make sort of the same shape here. It tapers off as it gets towards the bottom. So we have two of those. Now what I'd like for you to do is jump down below the ear on this side, and we're going to draw another kind of like a little point coming off this way. That helps to frame up the bottom. So trace along the bottom of your circle and come all the way out like this to the edge. Once we've done that, I want you to connect this line coming out this way, like that right there, and then I want you to put a little tiny curve to this line, because this is forming the nose. So you have two little curves that pop up here, one here and one here. If you can see that well. So there's two of them. So these represent the nostrils. Moving back towards the back of the jaw now, I'm going to draw this line coming up and down all the way up to there, and then we'll put a little tooth in here sticking up. Hope you'll be able to see that. Okay, great. Now, once we have the formation of the head pretty much sealed in, what we want to do is we want to put the eyes. So this is a sleeping dragon. So starting right over here on this side, draw this little line coming down and back up. One there. And then we'll add another one here. Down and back up. So our dragon is sleeping, right? You could put a line representing the eyebrow, the top, like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put two little lines right on the inside of that to show that those are the eyebrows, and he's kind of making a little bit of an impression with his eyebrows. Now this line that represents the main part of the head, the back of the head, needs to be connected all the way around, but not through the lines for these little horns sticking up. Once we have that, we're going to add something to our drawing that we didn't sketch in, because we don't always sketch every single thing when we're making these general shapes in the beginning. We just want the basic shape of what it is we're drawing. But over here on the side, we're going to draw this line coming out from the head and up towards the mouth like that. And once you have that, you can put these little folds in here. These are the little tiny toes on the dragon. And we'll put 3 of them. And then we have another one on this side, which comes out from the front and in towards the chin. Then you can add, of course, some toes here too. 1, put 3 here, 2, and 3. All right, there we go. So we have the little arms of the dragon. He's sort of sleeping on his arms. And now we're going to bring the shape coming up the belly, up towards this back circle, like that. Once we have that, we could draw the back leg. And the back leg is going to come following this circle in and then back towards the body like that. And then we can add the back leg. And the back leg, just like the front, you have 3 toes. So there's 1. I'll put another one here, 2, and we'll make this one sticking out from this side, 3. Like that. So now we have the head, the stomach, and the back leg. The most important part of this drawing, and the reason we're doing it, is the back. The back is the formation of those mountains. There's not a lot of curves in this one. There's primarily 2, and those will be found at the top here, down, and then the back leg. So starting with this giant shape that you made, the largest circle, you want to start tracing your line. Bring it up. Don't trace through this work you did earlier. All the way up like this, forming a mountaintop. Down. Another one here. And then one more back here representing the tail. And the tail is going to be coming down and coming up towards the leg. There we go. There we go. So now we have our dragon. We have the different arches for the mountains. Now we're going to put a little bit more detail in here. Starting over here to the side, now this is something you don't necessarily see, of course. If you're looking at a mountain, you don't see wings sticking up, but we're going to add a couple little wings up here. And you're going to draw a line coming out from the body up to the top, then a straight line coming out, and then you're going to put these little arches in here. 1, 2, and 3. Same thing on this side. You've drawn your line. Now we're going to put 3 arches. 1, 2, and a third here. That one's a little smaller, but that's okay. Now we've placed all of our lines onto our drawing. Our drawing's pretty much ready to be watercolored, except for we want to put a little detail in here using our pen. Now this is where you at home could trace over all these lines that I drew. Where I've already sketched mine in with a pen, I could go straight into the detail. And what I'm going to do is put a few of these little circles here by the head, and then if you could see that well enough, I may do it with the brush pen. You'll be able to see it better this way. What I'm doing is just putting a little bit of features on the dragon. So a circle here, these little splotches, and a line coming up the stomach like that, and then down the back tail like this, because this is the soft part of the belly of the dragon. So we'll draw these little lines kind of representing the underbelly there, like that. And put a few more small little circles and shapes making up the back of the dragon. Sort of spots, different types of textures for the skin. You could put scales on it, I guess, but that would probably, you'd have a lot of time-consuming work there because you'd have to add a whole lot. You can only add a few here and there to get the impression of it, though. Something like that. So now we have all these little spots going all over the back of the dragon. Now what we want to do is let this dry for a second. Make sure it gets nice and dry. And then you take your eraser after you've done that, and you're going to go over and get rid of all the pencil lines that you've put in originally. And what we should be left with is just the ink. And all those pencil lines disappear, giving the effect that we sat down and we drew this without much preparation or underdrawing. Hopefully this is dried enough now. I can already tell this one right here is splotched a little bit, but the brush pen has a lot of ink in it. And sometimes it takes quite a while for that to dry. But I think we're safe enough to go ahead and get rid of some parts here. If it was to splotch the paint a little bit, that's okay. All around the back, we want to get rid of all the lines that we started out with. I'm just going to be brave and go through this and see what happens. Hopefully we don't have a whole lot of ink smudges. So far, so good. The back tail. I'll try to work the areas that I drew first. That way I know for sure that ink's probably drying or has dried. Around the back leg here. Once you get rid of the lines, you can really see how that general shape that we did originally helped to give us the framework we needed to go in and sketch out the rest of the drawing. There we go. That's pretty good. Let me get rid of a few more back here. And we should be in good shape. I'm a little afraid to go real heavy over this back part. You can see I smudged a little bit there. So now we've erased, we've sketched out the drawing. The next step in this is to add our tone. And like I said, I want to use one color, but I want a variation of the tones of that color. In our case, we're going to be using green. If you wanted to, you could put a few more shapes in the background. Some mountains, rolling hills, those sorts of things. I don't know if you can see that pretty good or not, but I'm putting some arches and lines to kind of represent the tops of mountains, just off in the distance. And you could put this dragon sleeping on something. So let's draw a little line here with some grass maybe. Something like that. That just kind of helps fill up the composition of our drawing. And you can't really see those lines very well, but once we add this color, you'll be able to. All right, let's talk about tone for a second. So the first thing that I need to do, I need to keep water in my reservoir, but I'm going to pour a little bit into a few of these little cups. There we go. Now, after you have the water applied to your palette, you're going to go ahead, take this medium out. You can see it has a dropper, so what you're looking at is a little tip on that. So it lets you control how much of this medium you're going to pour out. For the first one, I'm going to add 2 drops. This one I'll put 3, maybe 4. This one I'll put 5, and this one I'll go with maybe 1 again, just in case that first one is a little too dark. I'm going to grab my brush now, and I'm going to mix this up a little bit. So what we're doing is we're just making sure, and you notice that I went to each one of them, and as I did that, I carried medium over. So I'm still increasing the tone of this color as I'm working with it. And if you were to be able to see, and you kind of can from home a little bit, you can see the variation here. So it goes from, there's not really a set light to dark. This one's really light, that one's sort of light. This is the darkest, and that one's sort of in the middle. Put one more little bit of drop in there. There we go. Now we should have a good variation, and we're going to see. I may add just a little bit of straight watercolor up here. So starting out, you can see how dark this is. It's maybe too light for the camera. I'll pour straight. This is the darkest. And as we start to add, of course, the more water to it, you're going to see that the tone gets lighter and lighter as we go. So there's a little more. And this should be very light. And you may have to play around with it a little bit to see. So the goal is to get this nice tone of range of color all the way to the lightest green that you have. And if this does have a problem picking up with the camera, what I'll do is I can use very, very, very dark consistency of the paint with it. That way you can see at home. So I'm going to start out with this fairly dark here tone at the top, and I'm going to go all around the top ridge or the back of the dragon using a very, very dark tone of this color all the way down towards the neck. And this is where you kind of want to not go over top of all your circles. Those little circles that you've put in there for the different patterns on the dragon, don't color over top of every one of those. Some of those you want to leave light. And the neat thing about this too, this type of watercolor anyway, is that you can literally take this and pour this straight onto your canvas if you wanted to. This is watercolor paper that I'm using, so it's going to be able to handle quite a bit of water, or it should anyway. So I'm going down the tail now, and you should be able to see that I've applied this all around the outside line, going all the way down the dragon's back. The darkest areas, of course, is going to be where the light isn't hitting. That'll be like underneath the arms here, around the back of the head. And you may have to continually put down watercolor to darken it. If that's the case, that's okay. The goal here, though, is to continue to add the medium using variations of consistency of water and medium, and get a nice flow of tone from light to dark or dark to light. That's the goal. And I always say this because I found it to be true, and I believe it is very true, is that it's so much easier for you to go from light to dark than it is to dark to light. Because if you start to build up a drawing, you'll see that you may have to take some away, and it's a lot easier to add to it than take away. In this case, I'm going dark to light, but I'm also very slowly transitioning from a darker green down to this lighter green. And you'll see how this kind of starts to work now. So we're going lighter as we get down towards the stomach. This back leg, though, you want dark because this is a big feature on the dragon, his back leg. And it's going to probably show a lot of color around this bend here. And then you can also go light as you get back towards the tail like this, and then down the tail this way. if you get a lot of water on your brush, you'll notice that as you're using it, the tone of the color you're using will start to lighten, and you can move it around in various places where you want that lighter tone, because you don't always want to keep the same consistency. Around the eyes, of course, here below the chin, real light down here, almost white, around the tip of the nose, something like that. Now, the belly, if we had another color, what we would do is we would then go in here with the other color and put dark to light through the ridges. So this line would be darker. As it goes out, it would get lighter. And showing that variation as much as you can in a drawing is real important if you're wanting to show light and how light reflects off whatever it is you're drawing. Now we can focus a little bit on the horns. I want to keep the horns pretty light, using a little bit of the white of the paper to show through. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. And you can see now this is a very slight variation. We're going to go back in a minute and darken it up after that dries. Sometimes you want to allow an area to dry well and work on something else and then come back to it in a minute. The mountains off into the distance here, we want dark tone at the top, and I'll apply this after I put color down. I'll put a few drops straight onto the paper like this. There and back here. Because I've already applied a little bit of water to the paper now, that pigment that I just put down will fill up just the areas that I have already placed the water in. So it's not going to run all over the paper. Basically just you tell the pigment where you want it to go by where you place the water. And then you could add droplets straight to your canvas or mix it like this over here. There's a couple ways to do it. Now if we're working on something where we're in person and you're here in the studio with me, you would want to probably go a little bit lighter. But for the purpose of the camera, I'm doing pretty dark. It's still sort of hard to see a little bit, but you should be able to follow along. You really will be able to here in a second once I start to put this droplet straight onto the canvas. That's pretty much the last step, is making sure that you get the really dark tone of the color you want in areas that you want to have it in. So I've purposely left all these little dots and all these little blemishes white, because I'll go back now with this mid-grade tone and just put a little bit of color inside of these. And it's going to look like it's pretty much blending in well, but once this dries, watercolor has a funny way of changing on you. You don't really necessarily see where all the pigment's built up all the times inside the water. And when it dries, it sometimes dries a lot darker than you intended. Now I'm going to take the watercolor ink here, and I'm going to go straight across the back in different droplets. So I'll put one here. Hopefully this is dried well enough that it holds the water in the areas I want it to. We're going to see. There we go. All the way back to here, down here. This is spilled over a little bit. That's okay. You can blend that out. Now we're going to pull down from those droplets that we applied and blend again, just like we have been. And you can add as much of this as you want. You can get it really nice and dark. And to really get a nice effect is you could add another complementary color in here to this green, and maybe even a nice warm color, or you could throw a purple in there or a blue, and the shadows will really pop out then. I'm going to put a lot of color here on the back. Now this whole idea of dragons forming mountains and everything, of course it's a world belief in many cultures across the globe, and I guess people have different ways of explaining their environment, especially early on before science and everything that we know today. But I really think that these different tales and legends are really special. I think they're things that we should be aware of and hold on to in a way, because they teach valuable lessons about respecting our environment, that our environment has life to it that we don't often see from a broad picture. There's things about we don't always consider, and I really like that idea when it comes to mythology, folklore. And so I'm adding a little more tone up here at the back. Around the back here, I'm going to put a lot. I'm going to put a ton of tone on this back leg, making up all the way down to the toes and the feet. And then, of course, you can pull color from different parts of the canvas. So if you have a lot of color spooling up, you could go and you can pull that color and put it in other areas. My mountains are wanting to run with me here, so I'm going to try to blend this a little better. There we go. Now let that dry just for a second more. It may take a second. And I'm going to put another tone on top of this, and then we should be getting close to being finished. Just remember to pick an area of your drawing that you want to show the most shadow, and in that use the less water. Down here along the stomach area, I'm going to actually put a nice big run of pigment here, and I'm going to start to blend that up to show a little more shadow. It may bleed over a little bit, that's okay. Out towards the front here and along the back side of the tail. There we go. You can see how that starts to come together. Tone is really interesting. You could take one colored pencil or one tube of paint, and literally by adding, diluting it in some way, you could have a lot of different tones to your artwork. And it makes a nice effect too. So if you have less, not a whole lot of materials at home, play around with just one color and see how many tones you can actually get. So I'm going to let this dry for a second, and before we close, I'll go in and add one more little brisk of tone at the top, and then we should be finished. So now I've added a lot of the darker hues to this. The tones have changed. The thing about this pigment is so weird because the liquid watercolor ink, when you apply water across your page and you start to try to put tones in, you really need to let the water dry in between each application of a different tone. So put down a light green, let that dry, put down a little bit darker. What happens is if you do it while it's all wet, this pigment has a wild way of mixing in with that water, no matter where it is, within the fibers of the drawing and evening itself out into this one tone. But you should be able to see the application of it and see the point of kind of how to do this by looking at the end result now. So as you can see, there's areas that are darker, such as right here around the face, and I'm still able to move some of this around, you can see. What you want to be sure and do though is as you're applying these darker tones is put it just in certain areas. Don't put it all across the page. Now if you do this when it's dry, it'll work really well. If you do it when it's still wet, you're going to get this kind of pooling effect. You may like that pooling effect because what you can do is get your brush, a little more application of the ink in your brush, and then dab it in certain areas so you can cause these spots to pop out a little bit more. Around the bottom of the chin, darker around the head. Of course, you'd want this area back in here to be a little bit darker too. And then you also want the back going up this way to be darker. We've talked a lot in the art workshop about shadow and lighting, and this is kind of an example of that too. Your mountains in the background, shouldn't worry too much about those, just kind of get a nice even tone of something on there, color on there. If you want to go real dark with it, you can. I would advise keeping it a little bit light. But as you can see though, the areas that we want dark have darkened in. I've left white here around the belly, the softer part of the belly. If this was to dry and then we were to come back in, let's say 20 or 30 minutes, maybe even a little bit longer, we could do even darker tones and keep going with this to the point where we have all these nice little dark swatches everywhere. If you don't want to mess around too much with this watercolor or watercolor ink, you could get a alcohol-based brush marker. Now what this is exactly what it sounds like. It's a brush marker. That may look black to you at home, but that's actually an olive green color. Once this all dries out nice and well, go back over it in your spots where you have these little areas here where you have your circles and the splotches. And this is a green. It's going to look darker than that. But you could go over certain little tiny areas of these spots, not the entire spot itself, but just around the corners of it, around the edge of it, on certain ones, maybe not all of them, and put a little bit more detail in with a brush marker. combining mediums is a real effective way to show tones, so you can pick the same color, just a different type of medium. So in this instance, we have olive green brush marker and then olive green watercolor ink. And when you combine those two together, it's the same color, but the tones really help to show texture, rises in different features, and shadow, light, and helps also even with perspective. The mountains being all tone, one tone out in the distance, and then this big guy being up front. Dragons are a real popular aspect of mythology and folklore, and it's certainly something that's been tapped into many times across many different pop culture references. A lot of shows today have a lot of dragons in them, and there's a reason why I think that this has persisted over time and across cultures too. So today our little sleeping dragon is going to be nice and cozy here as he dries off, and I'll continue to play around with this water some more, getting that tone across the certain features, and even when it's done I may splotch some at the top. But be sure and send us your work. We'd love to see it. If you get a chance to follow along with me on one of these examples or any example that we have, past videos, you can go to our YouTube channel and check out all the past art workshops. So it's Pike TV 99 on YouTube, and if you follow along with one of those features, if you follow along with one of those tutorials on there, please send us your artwork. There's tons of different tutorials using various mediums. Some of our little projects go really well, some go pretty good, but the point is we learn. We learn together and we work together to create art. And it's a fun opportunity, and I'm very thankful to be able to do it with you, believe me. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed today's art workshop. And until next time, I'm Christopher Epling, and keep drawing.